everybody here and hosting you in the space. We've got a great panel and program here, so again, appreciate everybody being here. Thank you.
Johanson, J2 Building Consultants. We're architects, engineers, construction managers, and so think of us as building doctors. We help you diagnose, prescribe, and treat leaking buildings, and so we work on the building envelope side of it. So.
Hello, I'm Stuart Chapin. I'm a reserve studies specialist with Obsidian Resources, which is just a sister company to Blue Mountain Management, which, from what I understand, maybe some of you work with Blue Mountain and maybe some of you are just homeowners or HOA leadership. So I help in all those cases. So whether you're managed or not, I provide reserve studies for anyone in Oregon or Washington. So.
Everyone's standing up. I guess I'll stand up. My name is Ryan Harris. I'm a partner at Weil Fotheringham. We're lawyers. We do all the lawyerly things. Happy to be here and answer your questions today. Don't ask questions that are too difficult, though. I appreciate you giving us some softballs. But I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be part of it.
Yeah, great. Did everybody get one of these blue things? It's not just J2 propaganda. What we're supposed to be talking about is reserve studies. And so in this, you'll see reserve study versus inspection and why you need both. And while Fitzpatrick said thank you, I got here a little early, and I want to thank the group that put this together. There was a lot of things behind the scenes happening, so thank you very much for that. We also have some video being recorded. We'll put this into a post-edit clip so you can share it with your other board members. You can share it with whoever you think would benefit from it. And so one of the main impetuses of us doing this was that CAI, Condominium Association Institute, is that what it is? Community Association Institute, is a great organization. You should join them. They've got great training and things like that. They don't serve Central or East or out at the coast, and so we've got offices in Portland, Seattle, and Salt Lake City, and so we're seeing groups here that aren't being served with enough education or training just because you don't have the trade associations down here yet. And so when asked to be on this, I was like, yeah, let's get down and let's talk. Let's talk about these various different things. Let's have a Q&A. But we're going to kind of start this with differences between reserve studies and inspections. And Stuart will backstop me on reserve studies. We don't do reserve studies. So in a real broad sense, the reserve studies are how you set aside money for future repairs that you know you're going to have. And so you're going to need a roof. Your roof is currently 10 years old. There's some kind of lifespan expectancy that it should last 25 years. So in 15 years, we'll need a new roof. So how much does that roof cost today? What will it cost in 15 years? Stuart's doing a great job of inflation plus market. I'm trying my best here to get you a number. And it's a budget. It's not set in stone. It's not, but it helps you so that when that 25-year replacement happens, you're not, I don't have any money and I have to do a special assessment, et cetera, et cetera. So what I like to say is reserve studies are very synonymous, they're estimates, they're longevity, they're things like that, and you're setting a budget. They're like in the health world, so playing on the building doctor theme, BMIs and average life expectancy. So as long as my BMI is good, I should live to 78 as a United States male. So we know all sorts of problems in there. Now, as long as my reserve study's good, that's a good BMI, will I live to 78? There's no guarantee of that, right? And so some of us get, unfortunately have diseases or have some kind of DNA problems or something, and we get cancer or we get MS or something. So that, in the construction world, is called a construction defect. My building wasn't built right. my roof was supposed to last 25 years, but it was put on backwards or crooked or flashing's missing. So now I'm getting water intrusion in. So now all of a sudden it doesn't last 25 years, it lasts 2 more years, and you're mad at the roofer, so you call Ryan. But what we're trying to do today is saying, if you take care of yourself, eat right, and exercise, and do these things, you will get that longevity. When you don't, what do you do? So we all understand we go to the doctor annually. You go through the thing of, pick something. Women with mammograms. You're taught how to do this, but the doctor has trained fingers, right? So they can say, hey, wait a minute, I feel a lump. Let's get you in front of a machine that kind of sees. Now, let's do a invasive needle that kind of checks out that lump and then, monitors it, does those things. So that's the importance of an actual physical inspection of not every year, but every 3 to 5 years. Have you looked under the siding? Have you looked at your roofing? Have you looked at these things, and is it performing as expected? And so then we can help you say, yes, it is. Yep, no cancer. Yep, no rot, no whatever. And you're doing great. Call us back in another 3 to 5 years. But where we run into this and why I said, yes, let's go talk to this thing at this event is we get all sorts of boards coming to us saying, I've got a reserve study, I'm good. Okay, that's like going to the dentist once and never going again. They give us a little nylon brush with some waxed string, but they attack us with stainless steel picks and, big grinders to clean us off every year, right? And so you need that annual inspection, or you need that x-ray, if you will, or those extra machines to kind of look at your building and make sure you're good. Did I defame reserve studies? No, not at all. And so, but it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. I've got a reserve study, I'm okay. The flip side of it that we see is my reserve study says I have to paint my building. So gents, sign up a painting contractor for us and we're going to paint. It's like, okay, is your paint failing? Do you like the paint color? Are the sealants good? Well, yeah, but my reserve study says I have to paint. Well, do you want to spend $500,000 on a paint job? We should get Fitzpatrick in here. Do you want to spend that? Well, no, but my reserve study says. Okay, why don't we go look at the building? It's not peeling, it's not, it's not blistering, it's not doing anything. You got another 3 to 5 years on here. Oh, that's cool. I guess we don't have to paint. And so it's a budget, it's a guideline, it's a tool. So you need both. And so we have some, ins and outs in here. Now, what's the reserve study side of that?
That was about everything I was going to say. So,
okay, have more wine. Here we go.
Maybe I'll say a little bit about what you would find inside of a reserve study, more specifically, and then maybe that'll also kind of help everyone understand what makes for a good reserve study, rather than just whatever PDF someone handed you for a lot of money, right? So inside of a reserve study, it's really kind of 2 distinct things happening at the same time. On the one hand, you're going to have this sort of laundry list of all the items in your community that your HOA either owns or is responsible for the maintenance of. That's right, there's stuff that you don't own but you have to maintain, or it's possible that that's the case. So that list is going to be itemized. Now, just imagine if you don't have a reserve study. Right now, you probably have no idea what you're responsible for, right? And so right off the bat, one of the most important things about a reserve study is getting that initial list in place so you even have an idea of what you need to be saving for. Now, along in that section, it's not just a list of what they are, it'll also say how long I think they're going to last for, right? So sometimes it's very obvious. Standard asphalt roofs maybe last 25 years in the Pacific Northwest. There we go. Some other things are very bizarre and I have to do a lot of research to figure out. Who in here has like play equipment in their community somewhere? Okay, 1.5 of us, perfect. There's no real standard way for me to say, oh, it'll last 10 or 15 years. I have to call manufacturers to have them tell me, Okay, well, we warranty for 8. Okay, okay, what does that mean? Oh, we think it'll last 15. Give me that, what's the materials? Give me an idea, And so there's an investigation moment to get an idea of how long each of these things are going to last. And then along with it, I need to make a determination, okay, but according to that 15-year guide, we might say, for play equipment, how along in that lifespan are we, right? Has it been played on really hard, therefore it's degraded much more than maybe it should have, right? So we would make that determination as well. And then lastly, and perhaps most frustratingly, I attach a number to it too, right? I say, okay, this play equipment, you're looking at $20,000 10 years from now, right? And I imagine there's a lot of confusion, or let's say the number one question I get is, how do I come up with that number? And the answer here is, I just flip a coin, or a lot of reserve study analysts just use a national database called RS Means. This is also something a lot of contractors use to help them budget for projects. That's a good first start. It should only ever be a first start. From there, reserve study analysts should be talking to local vendors, like a lot of them in the room right now, about what they're seeing for like square foot costs of installing roofs in the area. That's a really good resource. And then also, you have to pay attention to where this stuff is happening. So when I work with Blue Mountain communities, and I'm talking to a community on the coast, that number for the roof, for having the roof put on, is going to be different, very different than having a roof put on right here in Albany, right? So it's kind of all of those variables coming together to get that number. Now here's the thing, it's never going to be correct, I'm sorry, okay? There's just no way for me to tell you how much a roof is going to cost in 25 years. But I promise you my number is going to be a lot better than whatever number your neighbor came up with, right? So that's what you'll find in the components section of the reserve study. The other half of it is sort of like a big math problem. It's a giant calculator to spit out just one small number for your budget, right? It's the per unit, per month allocation to the reserve account, right? And that's a very complex, giant calculator. And we use technology called Smart Properties at Obsidian to help with that moment. We try to come up with sort of a range of options for communities to put numbers into that box. But what you need to know about that number, here's what it all boils down to, is how well funded is your reserve account relative to this thing called being fully funded, all right? And a reserve account is fully funded when you've saved exactly all of the money you should be saving to pay for everything when it comes due. So to use very simple math with a very simple example, if you need to replace a $10,000 roof in 10 years, you should save, setting inflation aside, $1,000 a year for that roof, right? You would be fully funded if you saved $1,000 a year for that roof, all right? Of course, there's inflation and other small changes to that. But what matters for that number, that allocation amount, is, are you fully funded? Or are you 70% of fully funded? Are you 40% of fully funded when you look at all the components in your community? And you want to be above 70%. You want to, if you ask me, you want to be 100%, right? You want to be completely fully funded. But the industry considers anything above 70% to be a healthy reserve account. So you want to be, and that number is over the life of the plan. So it's not just this year, but on average, how well funded is the account over the 30 years? So those are the two things. And from there, you could get an idea of what would make for a good reserve analyst, right? Is someone who has a contractor eyes, who could make determinations about how long the siding is going to last. And far more importantly, they know when to call a contractor to come out and do an intrusive investigation, right? Reserve study analysts are not contractors, but we are a first set of eyes. So they need to be the one to trigger the deeper analysis on top of the yearly inspection. So they need a contractor set of eyes in that moment, and then they need an accountant set of eyes too. So when you go shop for these professionals, keep both of those. You want them to check both boxes Obsidian, we check both boxes. I think we're the best in town, but that's the guidance. When you go looking for a professional, make sure they check both those boxes. That's everything I had to say.
All right, I got the coveted third spot. We are actually going to do some Q&A, guys. So, but I thought I would just make a few comments about reserve studies, a few legal observations. One question that comes up a lot in my line of work is, hey, does the association have to maintain this thing that is in our building, or do the owners have to maintain it? And sometimes the answer to that question is very obvious. Sometimes it's very complicated. A lot of the time, that is a legal question, and a lot of the time your reserve study is making a judgment about that question without ever getting a legal opinion on it. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that the reserve study is a great starting place. It maybe reflects the opinion of somebody who knows what they're doing, and maybe they've made the right decision. But ultimately, if they've put something in the reserve study, they've made a legal judgment about what your maintenance obligation is. And that may or may not be my legal judgment on that. So that's one observation. A question that comes up a lot is, what is our legal obligation to fund the reserve study? We have a reserve study. It tells us it gives us a number that we should be funding. And Stuart here has talked about different funding levels, and there are different funding models as well. There are some reserve study providers who will recommend a fully funded model, which is you pay the percentage every year that you need, so you have the full amount when it comes due. There are other funding models out there as well, and those are what we typically call threshold or baseline funding. So threshold funding is, if you do that, you're likely to always have a balance of money in your reserve account, because not everything has to be replaced at the same time. And so you go high and you go low, but you never actually go all the way to zero. And so some reserve study providers out there will say, well, we can do the math so that you'll never go below a certain threshold amount. So that's one type of funding model. There's also what's called baseline funding, which is we're gonna set you up so that you never go below zero on your funding model. Now, in my opinion, that's kind of aggressive. I'm a big fan of course, I only see the problems, guys. So maybe there's a lot of associations out there using baseline funding and it's working out great for them. But the people that come to me because they don't have money to do the repairs that they need to do. So I'm typically more of a fan of fully funded models. But the statute says that your association needs to fund your reserves. It says if you don't fund your reserves, you have to get a vote of the owners not to fund it in any particular year. And if you don't fund it in that year, you got to vote on it again next year. So you have a legal obligation to fund your reserves. But what the statute doesn't tell you is at what level you have to fund the reserves. So that's essentially a business judgment that's given to you as board members to decide how to fund. But you do need to be, as you make that decision as a board member, you need to have your board member hat on. I'm going to do what's in the association's best interests, not what's in my own personal best interests. So occasionally, board members will just say crazy things like, I'm not going to live here very long. I don't want to raise the reserves. Or I'm going to be dead in a couple years, and I don't, and that'll be the next person's problem. Those are not board members that are executing their fiduciary duties on behalf of the association. So if you're a board member, you need to have that fiduciary duty in mind. Another question I get asked a lot is, what can we do with reserve funds besides what they're being saved for? Like, hey, can we spend these on other issues, or can we spend them on, can you build a pool with them? No. Can we spend them on landscaping? We're running a shortfall. Can we use reserves for the shortfall? There is a mechanism in the statute for borrowing from reserves. There's limitations on what you can borrow for. Basically, you can borrow to meet high demand or unexpected expenses. So you probably could not borrow to build something that you don't already have. But you could borrow if you were running short on funds because of an unexpected expense. But then there's some statutory requirements about what you have to do after you borrow. So you have to adopt a resolution. You have to adopt a plan to repay it. So there is that option. Another question that comes up a lot in this context is, hey, we have a line item for our roofs. And it says they're supposed to be replaced at a cost of $300,000. Lo and behold, it's time to replace the roof. We have a bid and it's $400,000. What do we do about that? Do we have to levy a special assessment for the other $100,000? And typically the answer to that is no, you don't. If you have funds in a reserve study, those funds, in my opinion, can be used for any reserve item that you need to replace.
There's rarely a case where it's a total loss, like a car accident, except for Champlain Towers, where it falls down and it's just so bad that the building's condemned. And so, yeah, foundations, it's concrete. It'll last a long time. But the things on top of it, yeah, there's different things. But plumbing is a big one. Then you get back into the construction defect world. In the 90s, we had this great plastic pipe called Gold Bond. And it's all brittle, and it pops, and it floods units at $40,000 a pop. Where's our service master guy? He can raise his hand. He was around here. And so that was just a bad plumbing choice. So if you're built in the 90s and you got that plastic white pipe with a gold line on it, you better put plumbing into your thing. Cast iron pipe rusts all the way down to you can barely see out of it. And so while it's not leaking at the seams, it's restricted, your water's brown, it's nasty, you don't have any pressure, it's filling up your hot water tanks and causing them to fail. So we're doing a lot of that. And so
there are things that maybe don't need to be in your reserve study for 10 or 20 or 30 years, but you need to be maybe thinking about picking them up at some point in the future.
Yeah, to just touch on that, that's another thing when you're hiring a reserve study analyst, they should list those. And it should say, let's say 45 years for PEX piping, let's say. But they should list those, and they should note, currently not contributing to your allocation amount, but it's in there. It's in there, so maybe not you, but boards 10, 15 years from now could see it, could see the time clicking away at it, so they know when to pull it into being reserved for.
Yeah, that's a great... I haven't seen that, but I think that's a great suggestion. So with that, I think we should open it up to questions.
You want to do horror stories first?
Yeah. Oh, do you have another horror story?
I've got a great horror story. I've got a great horror story. So think of the timeline. And we'll just do multiples of 10. So the roof needs to be replaced at 20 years. The windows have 10 years. Something has 5 years. Those are all multiples of 10. So on our calendar spectrum, 24, 25, 26, we've got these bar charts, and they're going up and down and saying how much money you have and how much are you expending. There's a perfect storm where all 4 of those are going to come due, the 20, 10, 5, and 2, because they're all multiples of it. So that year, it's going to be because that just happened to line up with all of those things needing to be replaced. And we're working with an association right now. We've got a big association meeting on Saturday to tell them your plumbing system needs to be replaced. Your septic system needs to be replaced. The pool has been out of order for 4 years, and you want the pool. And your building has lots of rot. And so you guys are looking at about a $4 million picture. You've got 22 units. We can all do the math there. How's your reserves? Oh, we're 2% funded. It's like, I'm sorry, but all these things are coming due. These 4 big capital improvement projects, nobody's been saving for. Nobody's even paid attention to it, but they've all got a date, and they all line up on those dates. And it just happens to be doing that right now, and it's sad. And so.
Yeah, And then you get to get your lawyer involved. And you get to,
Who can we sue?
you get to,
Who screwed up?
If you're within 10 years, maybe you've got a claim, but you're usually not because you haven't paid attention to it. And then you get to do special assessment. And then people will get really, really mad at the messenger because usually it's not the board who managed the property they're usually long gone, it's some new board, they've been on a year or two, and they've done their due diligence and discovered the problem, and then it's a shoot the messenger issue where you're to blame because of what happened before, but you get to figure out what to do. You get to get a loan and do a special assessment and spend a bunch of money fixing stuff that you ideally would have saved for over time. That's a lot. That's how those go a lot, unfortunately. Yeah. Do you have any questions? I'm happy to take questions on topics other than
reserve studies is this
as well. We've got some expertise up here about buildings generally.
I have a question about reserve studies.
Yeah.
Or about the reserves themselves. If your reserve is fully funded, do you stop contributing to it or adding to it?
I'm going to have, you want to answer that question? What do you think about that, Stuart?
Well, I'm curious about the situation where that would come up. It seems impossibly rare that a community. So, what resulted?
It's a very unique community.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, she asked, what if you're fully funded? Can the community just sort of pause from making contributions in that situation? Is that yeah?
Yeah.
To be honest, I've never ran across a situation like that. So hard pressed. Yeah.
I'll tell you what I think about that. So.
Well, let me tell you first about our association.
Okay.
These are individually owned properties, and the only thing the HOA is responsible for are some sign lighting, some fences, some very minor structures.
Gotcha.
No building repairs at all. So we don't do roofs, we don't do painting, anything like that.
And you're confident you have all the money you're going to need. Are you fully funded? You're
100%
fully funded usually at point in time.
If we had
right?
to repair everything today, we have.
You have all the money. Okay. The statute doesn't really contemplate that situation, to be honest. It contemplates that you're going to need to continually fund, and that if you're not going to fund in any particular year, the owners have to vote not to fund. But the statute, like I said earlier, does not contemplate how much you have to fund the reserve study.
Okay.
So, and if you are already fully funded, then minimal funding would fulfill your fiduciary obligation. Right? So it could be a very minimal contribution as long as they're confident that they've got all the funds they need in order to replace that. Now, one of the problems, there are a lot of reasons the reserve studies, there are a lot of reasons associations don't have the money they need when it comes time to replace things. One of the many reasons is that the reserve study underestimates the repair costs, and construction costs in particular have been unpredictable. Jens and Stuart can probably speak to this better than I can, but they've outstripped projections for many years now. A lot of that's, I think, due to inflation. It's also due to interest rates, which affect financing of construction. But construction's been, I think, outpacing inflation for a while now, construction costs. So I'd be very careful about making sure you have enough in reserves. But generally speaking, yeah, if you've got enough, I think you're done. Congratulations.
Or lower your dues to a real low rate. We had an association one time that. Okay, great. So they got a windfall from a construction defect case, and they did a very targeted repair, and they had a very wise engineer board president who did a very good job at it. And at the end of it, they still had $1 million in the bank. And he said, "Hey, we're bringing dues down to $10 a month or whatever it needed to be," and significantly reduced the dues. So, but yeah.
Hey, Bob?
I can make a recommendation or just a comment on that. I'm a manager, so I manage properties such as yours. And you might be fully funded right now in 2024 at whatever, let's say $1 million, you grab a number. But these items that you have that have to be repaired or replaced that might be 5-10 years down the road, what's it gonna cost to repair them in 5 or 10 years? As Ryan said, construction costs have gone through the roof. Lumber has exploded. Supply chain issues, labor costs. We don't know what labor is going to be, especially with the labor shortage in America. My feeling is that you should keep doing it because you want to be covered, because you don't want to have a special assessment 5 years down the road, because this, I don't know, gazebo that's supposed to be $20,000. Oh, guess what? It's now going to be $75,000. But granted, you're not going to be spending it all at once, but you don't want to be caught short-handed. That's the way I approach it, because as a manager, I'm thinking fiduciarily. Is that a proper word?
I think that's a real word.
Yeah, I just coined it. Okay. I'm going to copyright that word. I'm thinking in your best interests, so that you aren't caught short-handed down the road. So that's something you need to look at now, because this is 2024. What's going to happen in 2029 or 2032 or something like that?
Just to talk more about like unexpected events, like natural disasters, fires, floods, there's all kinds of stuff happening. A car could run through your gazebo, so you don't know, even if it's projected to be replaced in 25 years, what if someone drives through it tomorrow?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of those events would be covered by insurance, so that would make up hopefully most of it. But yeah.
But if an uninsured driver hits your monument, and I've had that happen, and then you've got to spend $27,000 to replace his monument because the guy was drunk or he was a kid and he didn't have insurance, and guess what? You're on the hook for it.
Well, and that brings up another thing.
Deductibles.
Yeah, that I was just going to say is some associations reserve for their deductible. They have high deductible policies, and they're like, yeah, we don't just have 50 grand lying around. We better save up for it. So that's another thing that associations reserve for. I don't think there's any limitation. You know, there are things you have to reserve for. Major maintenance, repair, or replacement required in more than one and fewer than 30 years. That's what you have to reserve for. I don't think there's anything that says you can't reserve for other things. So if you want to reserve for something that's coming due in 40 years, I think you can. And I don't have any problem with associations reserving for the deductible either.
Do any associations reserve for natural calamities, earthquakes, things like that? Of course, that's pretty well just out of the question because it's so huge.
I think usually they address that through insurance. So you go get an earthquake insurance policy, and that's how you typically would address that. Yeah.
And Brian, to that point, with the earthquake policies, a lot of them are, you know, a percentage of whatever the overall claim was is what the deductible turns into. And so, you know, you might have $20 million worth of coverage if it's a good sized property. But if the big shaker damages, you know, $200,000 worth of materials, well then it's 5% of 200,000, not 20 million. And so it's so variable that it's really hard to build something into a fairly rigid planning tool like a reserve study and really feel good about it, that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, then you're just holding on to money, hoping that it's the right amount, I guess. Brittany here, who works in insurance, has a comment.
I would just plan on worst case scenario when you're looking at your reserve study, take the entire property value and figure out what 5% of that would be to lean on worst case scenario.
Yeah.
All right.
You know, that's an insurance month.
If you had an insurance event like that,
Yeah.
and you had reserves already for like replacement of your building, and you
But it kind of goes back to what you said, preparing for the deductible of it.
Yeah.
So the deductible is typically a percent. So then you just plan on the max percent.
Yeah.
That would be.
But you know, if you're spending the money, you can think about it as spending the money on the insurance deductible. That's one way of thinking about it. But another way of thinking about it is I'm spending the money fixing the building, which is what the reserves are there for anyway. So if you're already reserving for repairing the building and it covers your insurance deductible, in a way you're insuring for the deductible. Now, if you can add an additional line item for a deductible if you want to insure for that in addition to what you're already reserving for. I think that's fine. Yeah.
Just a small point on that. Industry standard says inside the report itself, deductibles, professional fees, those kinds of, that's not appropriate in the study itself. And that's just a matter of, what you're hiring me to do. I'm coming to look at, stuff that has a knowable life expectancy and it's real property and you're responsible for it. So the point being, though, is it needs to be somewhere, right? So talk to your managers about making sure that the deductible is known and it's somewhere in your budget. You just shouldn't be seeing it in the report itself.
So budget versus reserve study. Yeah.
Other questions on reserve studies?
So we just renewed our insurance for I'm with the Ron Village in Kaiser, and we have 5 buildings. And so our insurance company that we have came to us and said, we want to know if you've got galvanized pipes. I have no idea. and neither does most of the homeowners.
Yep.
Well, you might have to have someone come out and take a look at that and figure it out for you.
Well, I know that there are 5 buildings, and building number 1, I think, was built in like 1968, something like that. Where my building, I'm in 5, and it was in 1972. I don't know whether the pipes are different, but I know that we have had leaks between the building, especially building 1, to the street. So,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe we do need to just have a plumber to come and check everything, huh?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you just want to have a plumber come out, or maybe you have old buildings, so maybe you need to have, I don't know if you've had an inspection done, but you might want to have a building an evaluation done, including of the plumbing and.
Well, I think, because each one of them are their townhouses. And so, like, I own mine, and so we've had some that sold just recently and that have had inspections. But I don't know what they were inspecting.
Well, yeah, I mean, home inspectors, that is some of them are good, I'm sure.
Pulls out the drawer and makes sure it comes out and goes back in.
I mean, first of all, home inspectors, if they're inspecting a condo building, they may not look at anything that they think is the association's maintenance responsibility. So that's one thing. Second, the reports I've seen almost always have a giant disclaimer or giant waiver provision in them, and they limit their exposure to the fees. So for the board, I don't think you can rely on a home inspector that inspects because of a sale. I think you need to have your own person come out and periodically inspect.
Isn't an inspector going to be more concerned with something that's immediate, like if there's a bug infestation or a dry rot or something like that, as opposed to galvanized pipe? Because, I mean, are they really going to be looking at something? I'm thinking, I'm asking this as a legitimate question.
I think in my experience, there's a wide variety of quality of those kind of home inspections. So you'll get some that are very thorough about stuff like that, and some people might not even look at it. I don't know. Do you have a different opinion, John?
Yeah, there's several homeowner or home inspector standards, and they're limited to visual inspection. And the good ones will go in the crawl space. They should be able to see your galvanized pipes there. If you don't have a crawl space, if you're on a slab, you won't see that. And so, yeah, they're visual only. When they're looking at a condominium, they're focused on your unit. They're not focused on the walkway coming in or the rest of the building. The good ones will say something. And the good ones will look up on the roof, even though it's not your roof, it's the community's roof. So the good ones and the bad ones. And I was talking to Stuart earlier, and I saw an awful reserve study, and I was like, what in the world? I went to the guy's website. It was like 1-800-reserve studies. They were boasting that they would do it all from Google Earth. They were boasting that they would do it. They didn't need a site visit. They were both, I mean, it was just, and they're $800. Guess what? And so you get exactly what you paid for. You don't have eyes on the property, and it's not even compliant with half the states that they're doing it. So, and you know, and so you want a good person that'll dig. You want a good person that'll dig. So,
Virginia.
As a follow-up to that, we had a reserve study done this year, and one of the things that the reserve study recommended was an envelope study. So what does that mean?
yep. So that's the inspection. So building envelope. Think of it: walls, roof, and even subfloor is the building envelope. Keeps the weather out, keeps the conditioning, AC, and heat in. And so that we have to kind of peel it away a little bit. So it's not just a visual walk around and go, yeah, your siding looks great. There's actually some examples in here. Let's see. Go to that one. So when you need an inspection, when you need a reserve study, there's a before picture. This thing looks great until I pull off a couple pieces of siding and realize the deck is falling down. The next one. This siding looks great. It's been painted. Looks fine. Underneath it, if I kind of peek at the envelope, meaning open it up just a little bit. I don't have to tear everything off, but just a little bit. Do I find building paper? Is it lapped right? Do I find water damage and mold and rot and all that stuff? So that's that MRI or X-ray level where the doctor is just talking to us in the office and saying, how are you feeling? Why don't we get you in for a little bit further testing? And so that envelope inspection is, hey, your roof should last 25 years, but you might want to, have you done one lately? Most people go, what's that? Or no. Or we're experiencing a bunch of leaks and I don't know why. Great, let's get it. So we're not contractors, we're engineers. And so we're not selling you a new roof or deck or whatever that we sell, because we don't. So we're looking at your building and saying, here's what's going on, and actually it's a contribution of roof meets wall meets deck, and that intersection is now all messed up, and we need to work there because it's going to fall over. It's going to tip.
How do you do that if there's 30 buildings? You just pick one or two?
So we start with what you're complaining about, of, hey, we've had windows on the south elevations. Why are the windows leaking all the way over? Or in 30 buildings, you might have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, all built by different contractors, right? So for whatever reason, phase 2 has a bunch more roof leaks than phase 3 and 1. And so we'll do some little sampling, little spot testing. It's not random. We're going to go look and say, hey, why is there leaks? Why are there buckets in these units? And we'll say, hey, whoa, this roof's done wrong. This is why it's leaking.
So you do roofs, not just siding?
We'll do siding too. We'll do windows. We'll do all that stuff. And just, why are we seeing these leaks on the balconies? Or, you know.
If we see no problems, how do you decide where you go at that point?
Right. So we don't get called until there's problems, because you're talking to contractors and things like that. But we also have some free inspection. Walk around your building yourself. We have a guide. You can walk around the building and go, do you see these things? If you see these things, there might be more there. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So do you see staining and bubbling and blistering and things like that? Let's maybe have a contractor open that up or look at that, or we can open it up. And you'll find the underlying problems and then go from there. And then we'll come back to you. Hey, we looked at these 2 units. We found this roof wasn't installed right or whatever. How many other buildings did this roofer roof? All of them. Ooh. Do you want to expand that, or do you want to, again, board decision? No, let's just fix those 2 leaks. Or, wait a minute, we might have a bigger problem, and this is 2 years old. We're still under warranty. We can call him and talk to the roofer and say, come fix these under warranty, otherwise we'll sue you. And so to get that fixed, we want just a working building, right? That's sound. So
do you have a list of unreputable
yes,
contractors?
the usual suspect list. Yeah, you bet. We run into them all the time.
And is that okay
No, we'd get in trouble with that.
Jens
But
needs to talk to his own legal yes.
So you can.
This is now legal advice.
Yes, this is now legal advice. Yes, thank you. So,
J2 bid on a project that I have going on right now, building on global inspection, and I was actually kind of trying to direct the board towards J2 because they do a lot of work for us. They do a really good job, but they still went with this other company, which I had never heard of before. So I was a little bit frustrated. They're doing a good job, but they're really good. I just want you to know. So I'm returning that. They're not buying your Starbucks. They're not paying me. I'm just saying that they've done wonderful work for us.
Right.
So, and the thing is, what they do is, you were mentioning, what if you don't see anything? You're not going to see it because you don't have that trained eye. I don't have that trained eye either, even though I do this for a living, because they're going to notice things that we're not going to because they know what to look for.
So we have a maintenance person who's around, contracts for the painting and the roofing and all that. He's there every week looking at places, and when something's wrong, he fixes it. So we've never thought about doing an envelope study because we've got someone there every day doing things. So now, in the reserve study, they're recommending that. And so it was new to us, and I'm trying to figure out, is this an expense that we should spend since we have someone who's there?
How old is your property?
50 years.
Yeah, you should. The property I talked about that I asked them to bid on, it's a group of 13 commercial buildings. They're single level. They look like ranch style homes. They're wood frame, but they're actually offices. And they're roughly the same age as your property. And they have never had a building envelope inspection. So we're expecting to find all types of things because your gentleman that's providing the maintenance, who's doing the painting, with all due respect, is he going to know about dry rot? Or is he going to know about mold? Or probably not that type of thing. So maybe he would know the painting. If he sees painting bubbling or something like that, he might know that. But he's not going to know these other things. So yeah, from my stance as a professional manager, yeah, you really should.
thank you for the kind words.
And I think I'll jump in as well with the fact that buildings at certain ages, especially as you get older in age, I've had some in that same time period where they go to do a fairly simple project, maybe a little dry rot repair here and there, or hey, we're painting and that wood doesn't look very good, let's replace it. And then all of a sudden the realization is, oh, there's no building paper back here. Well, the buildings were built in 1972. It's now 2024. Well, if there's no building paper behind the siding, and we haven't been, we're not repainting and resealing everything every year, what's that look like behind there? And that's kind of where the folk like J2 get involved, and then they kind of they do that extra level of testing outside of just the superficial.
So then you can do a sampling size. You can do a sampling size. Hey, let's start with 3 buildings, or let's start with the 2 that are leaking, or let's look at every 5th building. And so we kind of get a
point too, because
feel.
the building is 50 years old. Construction standards back then were frankly primitive compared to what we've got now. From what we know about water intrusion, from what we know about environmental change, and all that type of thing, construction standards, engineering standards. If you end up spending all this money to do this, first of all, your building's going to be worth a lot more when you're done. And it's going to be in better shape, be upgraded to 21st century standards as opposed to something right around the time 3 Dog Night was popular.
Yeah, at 50 years, you start running into some age, some lifespan, just end of useful life. And so it doesn't matter how many times you've polished it and painted it and sealed it, they just start breaking down. And so and we can help you through those. Here's what I'd be worried about on your building. Ding, 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 ding. But you definitely don't have to go looking for these problems. These problems usually tap you on the shoulder and say hi, and there's something that comes up. But we do believe in, let's stay on top of it. Let's pay attention. Let's walk around when it's raining. Why is it puddling over there? Why is that leaking when it's not supposed to? And you'll get a good start.
Virginia, you had a question.
Yeah, going back to reserve studies. we did one this year, and there's a follow-up next year and the year after that. Do we look forward to having another full-blown reserve study the 4th year? I'm not sure what happens after that 3-year contract.
That would be a good question for Stuart. The statute says, I'll just add my 2 cents before I let him speak. So I'm a lawyer, I got to talk first. The statute says that you have to update your reserve study every year, or review your reserve study every year, is what it says. So I don't think that means you have to do a full reserve study every year. Now, a lot of reserve study providers will, when they sell you a reserve study, they'll sell you an update as part of that. So they'll do it for a couple of years. And then typically at the end of that, when you go and hire them again, they'll charge you the full price again and maybe come out and look at the property again and do an inspection. I think that's prudent. I think you need to have people inspecting with their eyes on the building periodically. But the review portion of it is there so that, if you have a reserve study and it's like, oh, you need to replace your siding in 10 years, but then you look at the reserve study and you're like, oh, we had that winter storm where our siding blew off. That's probably not accurate anymore. It's an opportunity to kind of look at it and say, is this thing still accurate? I don't know, Stuart, you have some other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so industry standard versus legal requirement, right? So industry standard is to think about it in 3-year chunks. So an on-site, 2 updates where the person does not come out and look at the product, but they do make updates to, maybe you did replace the siding, so they need to change the math about the siding. And then after that 3-year nugget, another 3-year nugget starts. And the price points should be varied, right? You should be paying more for the on-site and maybe less for the update. And a good reserve study company would, give you a discount and kind of even those costs out over the 3 years. All 3 are important, and so you could think about it that way. There's some terminology stuff too you might want to pay attention to. A level 2 is an on-site, but you've had a reserve study in the past. So it's an update, but they come out, right? A level 3 is just a financial update from the on-site that they did. A level 1 is a brand new full show, right? You haven't had one, or they're completely ignoring it and starting from scratch.
Or it was 12 years ago.
Exactly.
Yes, and keep in mind, and we sort of touched on it earlier, but reserve study analysts also have to look in those cases at CCNRs and plat maps to make the initial determination about what your HOA is responsible for. And Ryan made a great point earlier that's in a sense a legal opinion, right? Recommendation, suggestions, never legal advice, right? And then, so there again is a moment where maybe, like Ryan was saying earlier, it should be elevated to the lawyer maybe in those cases, but.
You're going to want to look over the reserve study too with your manager if you have one, or with the board, because you know what happened in your HOA. You know if you replace the mailboxes, or if you replace this fence, or whatever else, so that you can go back to the reserve study analyst and say, no, I think this is incorrect because this fence is newer than what you put down, or this whatever roof on the gazebo is older than what you put down, so that the numbers can be altered a little bit. So it's more reflective, because again, you're the ones that are on site, you know what's been going on, but the reserve study analyst doesn't at all.
That's a good point. Whatever version of a reserve study you've hired for is always a conversation. So it's never, here it is, take it or leave it. It's a conversation with management. It's a conversation with boards. Something I love to say is the best information that I could possibly have access to is information boards provide me. If you just paid a roofer to put the roof on, that's the best number available, period, for how much it costs to do your roof. And so that's part of the conversation is, hey, management, do you have documents about the last time the siding was done? Hey, board, maybe there's a new manager, right? And board has the documents I'd want to see. So it's always a conversation.
Joel.
So Ryan, you were talking about the legalities of things like amenities, or in the case of assets. Maybe for the group, you can explain what happens when an HOA says, you know, maybe we don't need the tennis court, the pool,
Yeah.
or the gazebo, or the clubhouse, or what have you, and they're looking for ways to maybe cut down on their exposure to responsibilities.
Yeah, well, there's a legal analysis that has to happen there. You have an association actually right now. Their board is spending $70,000 on renovating their clubhouse. They're just making repairs. They're not going above and beyond. But there are some owners in that community that are really upset about that cost, and they want to get rid of the clubhouse altogether. They want to demolish it and get rid of it. Well, that requires a vote of the owners to do. The board can't just do that. So in fact, the board has done nothing wrong here. They're maintaining what exists. They don't have the discretion to get rid of it. It's in the owner's control. There are things like that, like pools. You can turn off the pool, you can shut down the pool or the clubhouse on a temporary basis, but if your plan is to shut it down forever, you typically have to get an owner vote for that kind of thing. It's also a very common provision in governing documents that we sometimes refer to as the capital improvement provision, but it's usually actually broader than that. It says you typically can't make any alteration or improvement to the common property above a certain dollar number. Not every set of documents has this, but a lot of them do, probably most. It's a restriction on the board's power to make any alteration or improvement beyond a certain dollar amount without board approval. And if you're going to change the common property, even in a way that maybe is saving money, it's not all about it being more expensive. It can be about changing the aesthetic of the property. It can be about changing the functionality of it. A lot of the time, the board doesn't have the authority to do that without owner approval. So, we've been going an hour, guys. Are there any other questions? I'm going to open it up for one more question, and then we'll hang out we'll hang out. We're not going anywhere, so if you have any question you were too embarrassed to ask, if there's any other homeowners that have questions, by all means, stick with the floor. So my question is in regards to the maintenance obligation, like you kind of opened with. If a HOA decides to maintain something that is not a part of the HOA, do they have to then continue? Is there precedent set there? I don't think so. I mean, actually, probably for me, the bigger question would be, does the association even have the power to maintain that thing? Sometimes the governing documents have really broad grants of authority to spend money on things that the board thinks are in the best interests of the association, but a lot of the time they don't. A lot of the time they just say, hey, you maintain the common property, and so like periodically an association will come and say, hey, look, there's this piece of ground right next to the association, nobody's maintaining it, we think it's a fire hazard, can we mow it, can we do something to it? And that requires kind of a careful read of the governing documents sometimes to know whether that's possible. Like if the association is maintaining something that's the owner's responsibility, then typically that, I would say that's usually outside of their authority. I'm kind of a stickler on that. I'm usually like, look, that's not your responsibility. Why are you giving money to one owner? This is other people's money that you're spending on one owner. So, you don't have to go back and claw back the money necessarily, but usually I'm kind of a hard, no, that's not yours, that's theirs. And so that's how I come down on it.
But don't you open yourself up to a lawsuit if owner A gets this,
And that's where I'm thinking.
this money, and then owner B says, well, I want you to do that to my property?
Is it a precedent? I don't think it's a precedent in the sense that like a legal precedent where you got to keep doing it forever. I don't think it changes the responsibility in the documents. Sometimes there's an ambiguity in the documents that the board has interpreted in one way for a long time. and it becomes difficult to, that can sort of create if they've done it consistently for a really long time, Bob, then sometimes that can be an interpretation tool for how you understand the CC&Rs. And because the CC&Rs are interpreted like contracts, and a course of dealing can become a way of interpreting that CC&R. So in that case, you might be stuck. But if the CC&Rs are clear and the association's just been doing something it doesn't have to do, then I don't think you have to keep doing it.
Actually, just to jump on that, something similar, and it's something I see far more often than HOAs over taking care of stuff, is where they're taking care of stuff they do own according to the CC&Rs or plat map, but the tract of land was never turned over from the developer. So if you look at the county GIS, you'll see still owned by Lennar or whoever. And that is a clear-cut case where you send it over to the lawyer to go through the process of having that, how it should have been deeded to the HOA.
I can't stop. I love controversy. I've got two things that are going to be like a grenade into the room. The two most common things we see are windows, and who owns windows. Are they a common element? Are they a limited common element? What are they? And so this is where every single board argues over this, because there's usually some language, I haven't read your stuff, but 98% of them say the owners own the glass. And so there's an interpretation that says, that's windows. And it's like, well, wait a minute. On double pane windows, we can have fog in that double pane, so you can replace that glass without replacing the frame of the window that's nailed onto the framing, covered with siding, And so, or little Billy's playing ball in the house and throws the baseball through the thing, it's broken glass now. So yeah, you can replace that glass. But that is the number one thing misinterpreted, and how it goes, well, the last board's made me do my own windows, so everybody has to do their windows. And then a new board comes in and says, let's get an opinion on this. And Ryan says, windows is different than glass. Windows is actually nailed to the framing, and it's a common element. And then you have people going, I've just paid, you got all this mayhem. And so look at that stuff.
You get it in year one, so you don't have that.
Yes. Yeah, look at that stuff. That's the number one thing. Second thing is you got common element, limited common element. We got some weird ones that say special limited common element, and it's decks. And it's you use the deck, but you have to replace the deck, but you can't replace the deck. The association will replace the deck and back bill you. So I'm just tracing the math, and I'm like, if it were a common element, the association would be giving me an assessment bill to replace the decks. But now, because of this wrangle of bylaws, it's the association now has to come out, hire somebody to fix the deck, and then back bill you. You're both paying. In either case, the unit owner is paying for the decks. What's that called? Because it drives me nuts.
Well,
it's just a different way of 6 to 1, half dozen the other. The unit owner still pays for it.
I was just looking at a set of documents today where there are decks on some units and not all units, and they're treated as limited common elements. But they are a set, and typically for common element, the association basically always maintains the common elements, whether they're limited common elements or general common elements. But in some cases, if it's a limited common element, only the owner who benefits from the limited common element is assessed for it. And that was the case in the set of documents I was looking at today. So if you have, that's another thing that should be, and this association had it set up right. I was getting a question from the manager because she wasn't sure it was right. But they had it set up right, but they had a separate reserve item for the limited common element decks and they have separate assessments for that. It's only assessed to the owners who have those limited common element decks, and that's something that's very easy to screw up. It's screwed up quite frequently, actually.
Well, we'll see that in the repair process where it's $100,000 divided by 20, everybody pays $5,000. And wait a minute, I don't have a deck and I'm paying the same amount as somebody with a deck.
Yeah.
Get that straightened out. Ryan can do an opinion letter for $1,000 and you can just say, we've had a lawyer look at it. Here you go. And so,
The same with private roads, like maybe a couple of homes have a private drive or.
Private drive,
access,
yep.
and that's not built like that.
yep.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much, guys.
yeah, thank you.
We'll be here all.
Thank you so much for coming, everybody. We do have a raffle, and everybody has a chance to win. And I figured the most ethical choice for picking them would be the
All right, let's see.
one.
Ryan Harris. No.